Hello, friends, and welcome back to yet another Fridays with Mrs. Ginny. I am your host, Mrs. Ginny. And friends, tonight's reason for why I'm late is because my husband and I were out visiting family, and so we just kind of got caught up over there. But thankfully, we were able to get back sooner than I thought. I thought I was going to have to push the show back to 9, so we're running a little bit better. And so I definitely appreciate you guys being here, working with me on my time. And also, you could be watching a Mike Tyson fight right now, and instead you're here with me. So even greater blessings to you guys tonight, friends. I appreciate that. But jumping right into tonight's show, why I decided to title it "Who Are You?" is because my husband and I, we kind of have this joke when we go to church now. And so I've been telling you guys about how my church needs a new pastor, so please continue to pray for that. But the guy who we have filling in, he is a hoot. I really like him. I wish that he would stay, but that's not really what he's planning on doing. So we are going to have someone different. But I hope that the new guy is just like this guy, because this guy's hilarious. And so for the first few weeks when he was there, my husband hadn't been. And so I was telling him, what the sermons were about and what the new guy was like. And I was telling him, I was like, this new guy, his whole personality is based on the fact that he was in the military. And I was like, you're going to notice that when you actually start coming and you'll see him and you'll hear him talk. It's like every single message, every single sermon has something to do with his time that he served in the military. And it cracks me up because now, when he comes with me, it's like, okay, when is he going to come in? Like, where does it start? And it never fails that at some point during the sermon, usually, right out of the gate, it's he mentions it. And so like all of his sermon analogies, all of the, visuals that he provides, it's something that he did or saw in his time in the military. And it's so funny. And you just know that he loved being in the military. That was something that he really enjoyed. Another thing about him that I have found to be so endearing is that you could never accuse him of not loving his wife because he's always talking about his wife, and his wife is just a few pews behind me. And so she's there. It's not like she's gone. But he's always talking about her, gushing about her, how wonderful she is and how great she is. And she's actually away on a trip right now. And so, of course, he was telling us how much he missed her. I just thought that was so cute. And so that's another thing about this guy is that he loves his wife. He loves his wife as Christ loves the church. And then there was one more thing about him that I was going to mention, but now I can't remember it. But those are the two main things that really stick out about him. Oh, and that he loves the Ohio State Buckeyes. Okay. He mentions that from time to time. That's not quite every sermon, like the first two, but he does love the Ohio State Buckeyes. And if you say a cross word about them to him, then he's going to go toe to toe with you. And so those are the three things that really jump out to me about our guest pastor. And you know how he feels about those things because he talks about them. And our verse for tonight is, let me pull it up, is Luke 6:45, which is, basically what we're going to be talking about tonight. That truth that verse talks about, which is, let me get that ready for you guys. Okay. And so right here, so here it is. Luke 6:45, I'll make that a little bit bigger. It says, a good man out of the good treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is good, and an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is evil. For of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaketh. Okay, and so we're going to be talking about some characters in the Bible who we get like an overview, like a description of. The Bible gives like a brief synopsis of them, or like just a brief description of them. And we're going to talk about, why were they, described that way? Why were they called that? So like out of the abundance of my guest pastor's heart speaks, that he loved being in the military, that he loves his wife, and that he loves the Ohio State Buckeyes. And so the goal for tonight is for you guys, as the watchers, to get your gears turning and thinking about what defines me. What do I talk about? And I once heard from my old church that I grew up in, The pastor, he said one time that, people, they'll act out of character and they'll say, I don't know what got into me. Well, it's not really what got into you, it's what came out of you, because what you say is not some outside source. That's what was in your heart. That's why people have that saying of, oh, you can always trust the opinion of a drunk or a child. And so, because they just say, well, what's on their heart. They're very transparent. They're not always hiding things about themselves. And so, even people who think that they're hiding things about themselves, they still have some telltale signs. And so I want you guys to be thinking about, what kind of person are you, and how would people describe you or see you as from the outside? I'm sure most people that have encountered my guest pastor would say those things about him, say those three things that I've listed. But what would people say about you? What do people say about me? So if you guys have some descriptions of me that you could drop down in in the comment, then that would be very interesting. For me to hear what you guys perceive me as. What kind of things do you guys think that I care about? Where do you guys think my heart lies? Very telling. But we are going to jump right into this with our first person, which is Noah. Okay. And so we get a description of Noah. Hold on. Let me pull this up. And so for our first person, we are going to be going to Genesis, of course. 6:9. Okay. Alrighty. And so for Genesis 6:9, it says here that these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. Okay, so right out of the gate, our first person of the night is Noah, who gets the, very high accolade of saying that he was a just man and that he was perfect in his generations. And so, why does Noah get that high, accommodation? And what I have here listed in my notes is that, for one, is that he found grace in the eyes of God, which I think is in the verse right above this, Genesis 6:8, if I'm not mistaken. And that he feared God. And so we get that from Hebrews chapter 11. So Hebrews 11 is commonly referred to as the Hall of Faith. It's where we get kind of like a highlight reel, or like a like a Hall of Fame for the fathers of the faith. And there's even some women in there, some Christians of the past who were really good examples and had really good testimonies. Well, not even, because Samson's in there. So not even necessarily, but it's just a good list of people who had tremendous faith. Okay. And so, of course, Noah, he's in there. And it says that Noah feared God in his day. And so, that was something that was about Noah. And that I also have here that Noah was obedient. And so most of us are familiar with the story of Noah, Noah and the ark. And so, but just to give a brief overview, Noah, he was somebody that was tasked with something very incredible. Someone who, he was told to build something that had never been created before, to guard or defend himself from something that had never happened before. Okay. And so for those of you who are kind of unfamiliar, rain did not exist until Noah went in the boat. So rain was not always a thing. We have that saying, just as natural as rain. But actually dew is a little bit even more natural than rain. And so before the time of Noah, it didn't rain. And so Noah, God called Noah to, build this ark, build this gigantic boat. And it had to be very specific, and he had to do it, in a very meticulous way. And, his family, was all on board for the most part. We don't really get we don't really get any feedback from what his family thought. They just kind of went along with it. Whether they thought he was out to lunch too, but just did it anyway, we'll never know. But his family, helped him with it. And it took him like 100 years, if I'm not mistaken, to build this ark. And the whole time, God told him, like, it's going to rain on the earth and I'm going to destroy the earth. And he's just thinking, probably in the back of his mind, what the heck is rain? But okay, whatever you say. And he just had tremendous faith. Okay. And so Noah, he was characterized by that. And so because of that, and that he was, a righteous, upstanding man, perfect here, it means like whole or complete. Because no, there is not a just man upon the earth that doeth good and sinneth not. And so Noah, he was a sinner, of course, but he was whole in his faith. He didn't have any, serious gaps and holes in it, and he wasn't in any major sins. And so that's why, he gets described as perfect. And there's a few other people who get described as perfect. But yes, and so that is our first person tonight for Noah, a man who got the high honor of being called just and perfect in his generations, and got the high blessing of having his be the only family that gets saved from the worldwide flood. Because yes, the flood was worldwide. Okay, God's people said amen. And yeah, and so that was so out of Noah's heart, he poured faith, and he really, believed in what he said, and he didn't let anything stand in his way. And so yeah, like exactly what Catalia is saying is that Noah was an obedient man. All right. And for our next person, we have Moses. And that takes us to Numbers 12:3. Okay. And so here for Moses, in Numbers 12:3, it says that now the man Moses was very meek above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. Okay. And so Moses, he was the meekest man on the face of the earth. And, why does the Bible say that about him? Well, because, in his heart, he truly did not believe that he was really anybody special. He didn't think that he had the words to give, had the eloquency, the vocabulary to speak to people. And he really didn't think very highly of himself, which is not there's kind of a fine line to walk between that, because you don't want to have like a sense of like false humility, but being meek is a very good thing. Jesus was meek. And there's a difference, a vast difference between being meek and like being cowardly or being fearful. So those things don't go hand in hand, but he was very meek, and it showed when he's kind of going back and forth with God. And God is telling him, like, you're going to go talk to Pharaoh. And he's like, oh, but I don't know what to say. And I'm not really that good. And so can't you send Aaron? And God is fed up with him, as if God, Almighty doesn't know how Moses is, as if he didn't create him. Oh, yeah, that's what he tells him. He's like, I created the mouth and the tongue, and, I rule all those, and, I know what I'm doing. But he capitulates, and he lets Aaron come along and help Moses, because Moses is doubting himself so much. But yeah, and so at the end of the day, Moses he becomes a greater leader, and he no longer has to lean on the training wheels of his brother Aaron. But yes, he was a very meek man, and I have here in my notes for him, when it comes to things about him and why he gets such a high accolade. Because when it comes to Moses, being meek is obviously a very good character trait, because this was the meekest man on the face of the earth, and he gets such a big portion of the Bible, and he gets such honor and reverence in the Bible. I would say that he's definitely in the top 5 most famous people to have ever existed on the face of the earth. Now, you could kind of argue about who's number 1, excluding Jesus. In this list, I'm excluding Jesus. But he might be number 1. A lot of people might say that Moses is the most famous person who ever lived. Some people might challenge that, go toe to toe with like King David possibly, or maybe Adam. But Moses is definitely right there up in the top 3, if not, he's in the top 5 definitely, but if not the top 3 of most famous people. And how did he get that way? Well, he was very meek. He just wanted to be a good servant of God. And I have here that it says that he chose affliction of the pressures of sin for it. He chose affliction over the pressures of sin. Okay, can I read my own notes? He chose affliction over the pleasures of sin for a season. Okay, so he was dedicated to what he believed in, and he was willing to, sacrifice for those things. Next thing I have is that he did not fear the wrath of the king, and that he also was obedient. Okay, and the Bible says that, now if I'm not mistaken, obedience is better than sacrifice. And so just doing what God tells you to do is a great is much better than going out of your way to to sacrifice or you know um um you know uh what's the word I'm looking for, like deprive yourself. Okay, so it would be better to just do what God told you than to deprive yourself of something else. Okay, and so, yes, and now Moses, he had some ups and downs because once again, as incredible as he was, and as moved by God as he was, he still was not perfect. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And so he didn't, get to see the promised land because of his anger, which is a sin, to be angry without a cause. But he was still, very greatly blessed because he still had, most of his ducks in a row. And so this was a man who was characterized by his meekness. And so would we be characterized by our meekness? Would that be something that someone would say about us? It's good to think about. How would someone describe us? Would someone say that we're angry, that we fly off the handle easily, that we're emotional, reactive? Um, you know, are we someone that would be described as, impatient? These are things to think about because these great people of the Bible, they were described using, terms that were very good. So that's for Moses. And so our next person is Job. And that's going to take us right to Job 1:1. Okay. And so that says, so here in Job 1:1, it says that there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. Okay, so what a compliment. Okay, so not only do you get a book in the Bible named after you, but it starts off by just singing your praises, telling about how you were perfect, upright, you feared God, and you eschewed evil. I mean, it's a really great way to start out a story that's, going to turn really ugly really fast. Okay. Um, but yes, so why was Job described as this? How did Job earn these accolades that all these that he earned right here? And well, what you'll find when you read the story of Job is that he was someone who was dutiful in prayer. So he prayed a lot. He prayed for his children before they all got destroyed. He loved his wife. He didn't, he wasn't mean to his wife, even when she was being a complete idiot. And he withstood persecution. He withstood suffering when he really had no reason to endure it, other than just to test his faith. He didn't understand why it was happening. He was talking to God. He was very confused and upset, understandably. But at the end, it says that Job 1:22 at the end of this chapter, that in all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. Okay, so he was a man who endured hardship wisely. Okay, so that's a big one for people. Can we endure hardship wisely? Can we, take suffering and not, say something as crazy as, oh, I don't know, curse God and die? That's what his wife said. Are we people who are characterized by, I've heard people say that, oh, I was around such and such when they were in their last days and I saw them right before they passed away. And, they had such character, they were so demure, they carried themselves in such a way that, it was so beautiful. And, they weren't, complaining, and they weren't making it seem like they were really suffering, and they just had such a good attitude about it. Are we the kind of people who could be characterized by, there's another verse that it's like, I can't think of all of it, but it's like, withstanding withstanding hardship as a good soldier in Christ Jesus. There's like a verse like that. It's something like that. I can't think of it now. But it's basically like, can you withstand suffering, struggling, something like that as a good soldier. I know it says being a soldier in Christ Jesus. And so, yeah, that really exemplifies Job. He, withstood suffering, and he came out on the other end better than before. And so that's what can await us if we do what we're supposed to do. But are we that kind of person? Who are we? Bringing it all together. And some other things that I have here about Job is that he was patient and that he was faithful. Okay. And so he continues to praise God. He continues to, like I said, not curse God. He even has his knucklehead friends come by, and I don't even know what they thought they were doing. I mean, surely they didn't think they were encouraging him. I hope not. But they were just trying to give him some direction and guidance, I suppose. And so they were like, well, surely you did something wrong. I mean, all of this isn't going to happen to you just because you're a good person. And it's like, well, no one's a good person, but, it's not like, all of this is happening because, you did right. When in reality, that's exactly why it all happened to him, is because he was doing right. And so he has his knucklehead friends. He has a crazy servant who pops up for a few chapters and talks bad about him as well. And so, he really has everything set up against him, yet he is steadfast and he is faithful and he was very patient. And it all worked out in his favor in the end, because patience is a virtue. And so let us look at the life of Job and see how our lives reflect, up against his. And it's just like, okay, well, how are we measuring up to Job? Okay, because measuring up to Jesus, none of us do that. And so that is always just, an effort where we're going to see where we always fall short. But, when we see someone who's fully, only human and not divine at all, how do we still even stick up to them? So that's a good, thought to think about. And so that's for Job. Okay. Next we have King David. Now I need to send this link to myself. Okay, let's see here. I didn't even think about this. We might have to hold off on King David because let's see. Okay, take from that one, send to this one. Let's see what we got. Okay, so we're gonna pull up King David, and I have a link that I want to show, but let's see if this link is gonna work. Okay. All right. Let me pull up what I'm looking for. Okay, perfect. That's exactly what I want. All right. And so, yes. All right. And so for King David, let me make that bigger. We have here in 1 Samuel 13:14, a phrase that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, but it says, "But now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart, and the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee." Okay, so this is Samuel speaking to King Saul, explaining to him how the kingdom is going to be taken from him, and it's going to be given to a man seeking after God's own heart. And so that is speaking about David, because David is the next king of Israel after King Saul. And so, how did David get this, high praise of being called the man after God's own heart? And so I have this article pulled up. Don't want that. And it's called 7 Reasons David is Called the Man After God's Own Heart. Okay. And so these are not KJV only, but I still found them to be pretty insightful. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. All right. And so here we go. And it starts off by saying, oh, I probably need to make that bigger as well, because it's pretty small print. And starts off by saying, you'll see, okay. A man after God's own heart. What could be better than being after the heart of our Creator? But why was David described this way? And what exactly does it mean? And it gives the verse. And it says, to understand why David is described this way, we must first look at the circumstances that preceded this declaration from the Lord. Okay, it says that he is the first king of Israel. Here it goes on to say that Saul was the first God-appointed king of Israel. He looked and acted the part. He was known for his courage and generosity. He was tall and striking in appearance. At first, Saul did well, but it did not take long for his pride to grow and his reliance on God to fade. When Saul and his army were under attack and afraid, instead of waiting for Samuel to arrive and make a burnt offering to God, Saul took matters into his own hands and made the offering himself. There were several problems with him taking this action. One is that he had received an express command to wait 7 days, and this had been confirmed by appointed signs. Number 2 was that he knew the stake of his kingdom depended on him waiting. Number 3 is that he chose impatience and distrust in God. He probably didn't mean to purposely go against God's command, but did so because of the pressure he was under. To continue waiting was tedious and uncertain. At any moment, his retreat to the mountains could be cut off. He chose what looked like the prudent thing to do, take matters into his own hands, and make the burnt offering himself. And 4, when called out for his disobedience, he made excuses rather than taking responsibility for his actions. So, when it comes to these 4 reasons as to why the kingdom got stripped from King Saul, these are things that we don't want to do. These are kind of actions that we don't want to be assigned to us. And so, let us be reflecting on, okay, am I the kind of person that's impatient? Am I the kind of person that takes matters into my own hands when I kind of already have confirmation that God said he's going to do X, Y, and Z? Very important. It goes on to say, this disobedience by Saul was the beginning of his downfall. His pride, arrogance, and disobedience continued to grow. Saul would try to make up for his lack of obedience and trust in God by making burnt offerings, but God knew his heart, and it talks about it in 1 Samuel 15:22. And we're not going to read it because it's not King James, but that's, the verse where it can be found. It says, because of his disobedience, arrogance, lack of faith, and refusal to trust in the Lord, Saul was rejected by God as king, and David was chosen. Okay, it says, what made David different from Saul? Okay. Interestingly, David was only a child who had accomplished anything, who had not accomplished anything king-worthy at the time Samuel prophesied about a man after God's own heart becoming king. But God knew David's heart and what he could do long before David had any idea what his future held. It is said that actions speak louder than words. See 1 John 3:18. Though David was a musician and wrote 73 of the 150 Psalms in the Bible, it is by looking at the way he lived his life that we see his heart. Okay. And so number 1 is David's faith. David's first and one of his most well-known accomplishments was his defeat of the Philistine giant, Goliath. It took courage to face a sword-wielding giant with nothing more than a sling and some rocks. Before throwing the stone that would take the giant down, David declared his entire embassy may know that, okay, well, that's a fake version. And it goes on to say down here that David gave God credit for defeating Goliath before the giant was hit by the stone. It was through his faith that God empowered him to be successful. This giant-killing faith remained with David his entire life. Number 2 is David's trust. Okay. And it says, even though Saul was was a constant threat to his life, David had respect for him as king and spared his life on more than one occasion. When David had an opportunity to kill Saul in a cave, he chose not to. And then it goes on to express that those two verses about how he had that opportunity. And it goes on to say, David showed complete trust in God, which meant it was not in his hands to strike down the king God had put in command. David knew that God had proclaimed him to be the next king, but unlike Saul, with his burnt offering, he would wait until God removed Saul, rather than taking the matter into his own hands. He also was relying on God to save him from the wickedness of Saul, who sought to destroy him. Number 3 is David's love. It says here that in all his dealings with Saul, David showed agape type of love toward the man who was determined to be his enemy. Whenever people use these terms, it always cracks me up because it's just so unserious. It's like, just use regular terms. It is interesting that this man, chosen by God and described as being after his own heart, did this centuries before Jesus' Sermon on the Mount and his command to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Well, that really shouldn't be surprising because, the same God who said to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you is the same God who wrote the book of Leviticus, where that's where that came from. Jesus didn't come teaching anything new. He came to fulfill what the prophets of old had already said. And so, loving your neighbor is something that was taught as early as the book of Leviticus. So that shouldn't surprise anybody. And here it says David's humility. Even after experiencing remarkable success in battle, David remained humble. When Saul offered his daughter Michal to David as a wife, he responded, and it gives his response, but it's not in the right translation. It says, later in his life, after David was crowned king and had conquered his enemies, the prophet Nathan told him of God's promise to extend his dynasty forever. David prayed, and then it goes on to allegedly give the prayer. And it picks up here, says, at this point, David had known immense success at everything he put his hand to, yet he never took the credit or considered himself worthy of greatness. He gave all the glory to God. Number 5 is David's integrity. David admitted when he was wrong and took responsibility for his mistakes, which was a sign of his deep integrity. We see this when Saul is pursuing him and David lies to Ahimelech, the priest, to get food for his men, as well as the sword of Goliath. David's lie eventually led to the death of 85 priests, as well as the entire town of Nob by the command of Saul. When David learned of this, he admits it is his fault and takes in the sole survivor of the priesthood settlement. This was one of the many times where David took responsibility for his mistakes and did what was in his power to make it right. Okay, so it's very common for men and people to say online about women that women are allergic to accountability and they don't take responsibility for their actions. So basically saying that women don't really have a lot of integrity. And so, everybody should have integrity, but apparently, this is kind of a blind spot more so for women, according to the internet, I guess. And so as a woman, be mindful, think to yourself, am I someone who's characterized by having integrity? Am I someone who can own up to my mistakes and be, truthful and mature about where I fall short? Very, very important. All right. And then down here it says, when David learns of this, I already finished that. David forgives. Okay. Later in his life, David's integrity took a drastic downfall and he slept with Bathsheba and then had her husband murdered. David was distressed when the prophet Nathan revealed the terrible thing David had done. Instead of making excuses for his behavior, David said, what 2 Samuel 12:2 says, and it goes on to say, though David made a horrible decision, he took responsibility and had remorse for his actions. He earnestly sought God's forgiveness. David penned Psalm 51. And And after his sin of adultery with Bathsheba and the murder of Uriah, in his psalm, David brokenheartedly confessed his sin and asked for God's forgiveness and restoration. And lastly, David worshiped God. Even though his poor choice with Bathsheba led to much heartache for many years to come, David never stopped worshiping God. It is believed that Psalm 32 was also written by David at about the same time as Psalm 51. In it, David says, and it says what, allegedly what he says, and it says that he realized his righteousness did not come from his actions, but from his love and submission to God. At a time when others may have run from or hidden from God, David chose to praise the Lord. Many of David's psalms were full of his heartaches and even questioning of God, but he never stopped serving and worshiping God. Reading about David's life not only shows us why he was called a man after God's own heart, but also helps us to see the characteristics that we should look for in ourselves as followers of Christ who are also after God's own heart. Okay, and so that's where we'll leave it. But yes, and so that really just sums up, the whole point of what I'm making is that, can we say that, we are walking in the footsteps of David? Can we say that we are people who, forgive and people who worship God even when times are tough and we've made bonehead decisions? Do we trust God? Do we have faith in God? Do we love God? These are things that can be really difficult when times are hard, but they're absolutely necessary and they're going to help us actually get through it better. Like for me right now, of course, I'm pregnant and I had a midwife appointment today and she was asking me, am I still doing my exercises? Am I still stretching? And I was like, I'm doing a little bit, but not really. And I'm not really doing my exercises and stretches like I should be because I don't feel like doing them because I'm sore a lot of the time. However, if I were to do them, I would feel sore less because I would have done them. And so it's kind of like a self-defeating, circle where it's like, well, I don't do the exercises because I don't feel good, but I don't feel good because I'm not doing my exercises. And so when we sin and then we run from God, well, we're going to be led into more sin because we're distancing ourselves from God. And David said, ironically, I have hid thy word in thy heart that I might not sin against thee. And so it's important that we as Christians, that we hide God's word in our heart. And when we sin, we run to God. So that way we don't continue to sin and mess up things even more and end up like King Saul. And so that's for David. And so now we are heading into the New Testament, where we have, oh my, it looks like I didn't finish that one. Okay, so maybe this is our last one for the night. So for John the Baptist, okay, let's see here. We're going to go to Matthew 11:11. All right. Oh, wait, that's the wrong one. No, hold on. Technical difficulties. There we go. Okay, Matthew 11:11 says, Verily I say unto you, among them that are born of women, there hath not risen a greater than John the Baptist. Notwithstanding, he that is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. And so, wrapping up for this evening, we're going to talk about John the Baptist and how he had the probably the highest praise that anyone could want in the Bible is that among them that are born of women, so everybody, because everybody's born of a woman, and all God's people said amen, that there has not risen a greater than John the Baptist, okay? And so why did John the Baptist get, this high praise, this, really outstanding compliment of being the greatest, person alive, being the greatest person ever besides Jesus? And it's interesting because Moses, like I said, Moses and David and Adam, these are people that are much more well known, even though John the Baptist has this to his name. He is the one who is said to be the greatest among men. So, why is it that he's different? Like, why is it that he's not more famous? Interesting. But anyways, well, I guess it's because even in false religions, they know about David and Noah and Moses, because even like the false religions, they'll have the Old Testament. So like in Judaism and Islam and, Hebrew roots and Hebrew Israelites, all those different, cults and false religions, they'll still acknowledge, characters like Noah and not Noah, but Moses and David, because they still claim to appreciate the Old Testament. So maybe that's why, because John the Baptist is in the New Testament. That's just what I'm thinking. But anyways, and so when it comes to John the Baptist, why are some of the reasons that he got to be called the greatest among that are born of women? And so, one of the things that I have here is that he was full of faith. Okay, so he comes on the scene, and we don't get a whole lot of information about like his preamble. We just kind of get introduced to him, and he's baptizing people. He's already John the Baptist, and so it makes me wonder. Like, was he taught from the very beginning? Like, was he taught as a child? This is what you're here for. This is your life mission. This is what you're going to do. You are going to prepare the way of the Lord. You are going to be the one crying out in the wilderness, like it's prophesied. I believe it's in the book of Isaiah. Did his parents teach him that, from the time that he was a child? Or is that something that he kind of grew into as he was older, as he, on his own decided to, follow after the Messiah? He was like, I want to dedicate my life to the Messiah. I'm sure he must have known that, because what was he? That was because he and Jesus were related. So what was that? His cousin, right? John the Baptist and Jesus were like cousins. So I'm sure he knew that, his relative was the Messiah, because, Mary knew and Joseph knew. And so I'm sure, and then, so yeah, Elizabeth knew, because, when Mary spoke, John leapt up in her stomach. And so, Mary and her husband, not Mary, good grief, Elizabeth and her husband, whose name is escaping me as well, they both knew that, what Mary was carrying, who Mary was carrying, was to be the Messiah. So, maybe as an adult, he kind of grew into it. He's like, I'm going to, live my life to serve the Messiah. Or was that something that he, was always trained to do? We don't really know. We don't get all that information. But he was full of faith. And so whatever caused him to believe the way that he did, he believed very much. And so he was someone who was going out, baptizing, preparing the way of the Lord. And this is actually a really good verse for anyone in your life who questions the deity of Christ. Because like I said, I believe it's Isaiah that, talks about, that prophesies, the one who will come, crying in the wilderness, preparing the way of the Lord. It says in Isaiah that he will prepare the way of the Lord, the way of God. And then in the New Testament, it says that he will prepare the way of the Lord. And so those are parallel verses. And so if John the Baptist is preparing the way of the Lord, and he's preparing the way for Jesus, then that means that Jesus has to be God, because the person who does that is preparing the way for God. And so that's a really good verse to go over with someone who doesn't believe in that Jesus is God, or what have you. There's a few different religions that don't subscribe to that for whatever reason. And so next is that he was bold and courageous. Okay, so he's speaking, and he's prophesying, and he's being used of God, and a lot of people don't like that. Okay. And so the king's wife, she's not really a fan of it, because he condemned their union. He condemned them getting married. And so that's why she orders that he be killed. But, he kept doing it anyway. And, he did have his brief moment of doubt when he was in jail, asking for, asking for his disciples to, ask Jesus, like, are you him, or do we look for another? Because at the end of the day, deep down, he really knew that Jesus was the one that was prophesied of. But, when times get hard, we have doubts, and God understands, Christ understands. he experienced human life. He gosh, what is the verse? It's like, he is not unfamiliar with how we feel. He is not a stranger to how we feel. You guys know what I'm talking about, man. I'm struggling over here with these verses, this recall. But yeah, it's like, he put on flesh, to so that way he could understand, how we feel, things like that, that verse. Okay. And so, yes. And so therefore, Jesus, he understood, how John was feeling. But deep down inside, he always had faith and he always knew. And that's what gave him that courage to even go forth and do what he did and speak the way he did. Because he was like, I know I'm right. And, I know that my Redeemer lives. And he was hard working. Okay. So let's not forget about that being an important thing. Today, more than ever, people are lazy. Oh my goodness. And so people don't want to work. They want things to be handed to them. And they just want free stuff. And, but, when it comes to John the Baptist, he was willing to get it out the mud. Okay. And so he was very dutiful. He was someone who, was willing to put in the long man hours. Because not only did he do baptizing, of course, but he had his own disciples and his own followers that he had trained and won their souls and discipled them, to be just like him and go out and do what he was doing. And so that takes a lot of work, to go out and win souls and to train them and disciple them to be, really good, active, flourishing, fruitful Christians. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of time. It's not something that just happens by itself. And so for him to do that, that shows that he is someone who is very hardworking and very dutiful. And that goes back to him having the faith, him putting in all this time and effort. It's like, well, what's the point of this at the end of the day? Well, the point is that he's doing it for the Messiah. He's doing it for the kingdom of God that he believes is waiting for him. And so, yes, at the end of the day, friends, life is going to come at you. People, they say that, atheists, they'll say that, religion is for people who have a hard time adjusting to reality, or people who can't cope with reality, or, people who just have a hard time, it's for people who are weak. And it's like being religious, whether or not you have the right religion of Christianity or not, that doesn't stop anything from happening to you. Like, that doesn't stop bad things from happening. That doesn't make your life on easy mode. And so just like being an atheist doesn't make your life any easier. Like, there are plenty of atheists who are poor, who have health struggles, who, are just going through a hard time. And now there are certain people who have been blessed by the devil, who, the devil is, rewarding them for being good servants of his, like celebrities, who send a lot of people to hell and are good advocates of, worldliness. And so the devil will bless them. But just your everyday Joe Schmo, we're all dealing with the same problems. We all have to live under the same economy. Okay. We all have to deal with the same housing market. And so, whether or not you believe in God or not is not really gonna, affect you a lot, in this physical sense. And so, we're always going to have struggles. But what we can lean on, if we're, going back to the theme of the show, is, who are we? What are we? Are we the kind of person that when times get tough, we're going to lean in, and that we're going to, have faith, and that we're going to say, like, no, like, I'm not going to let this deter me. I'm not going to let this waver my faith. I know that, Christ is with me. I know that, the verse that says, I once was young and now I'm old, and I have never seen the righteous forsaken nor his seed begging bread. I'm going to claim that for myself. I'm going to believe that God is with me, that he is walking through the season with me, and that he is going to be able to, preserve me. And that whether or not my physical life or my physical safety, my physical health, be intact, then, that's secondary, because I know that all things work together for the good of those that love God and are called according to his purpose. And so, that is what I wanted to be put on you guys' mind today. And so, just thinking about, my guest pastor, going back to that, it's so interesting because, and like another thing too, is that, I don't want to make it sound like he's like some carnal guy where all he cares about is like the military, his wife, and Ohio State Buckeyes, because he definitely loves God. And, he's always talking about how at his job, he's always trying to witness to people, and that he's always trying to, bring up Christ any way that he can. You got to be careful when you're at work. But, he tries to bring it up anytime that he can. And he tries to be a soul winner, which is great. And so that is also something that's on his heart. That's, out of the abundance of his heart, that's what he's speaking, is the things of Christ, because that's what he loves. He loves Christ. And so I want this to be kind of self-reflective for all of us, including myself. As I've been working on this, I've definitely been thinking about myself, how do I stand up against these people? Am I exuding the characteristics that I want to exude? Am I making excuses as to why I'm not exuding them? But these are important. And so, because we can always, make excuses for ourselves as to why we're not doing certain things. Oh, well, I had a bad day, or, I can't do this because of my job. I can't go around and profess Christ, all the time because, I have a job and I work for the government, or, I can't go out and soul win because it's too cold or it's too hot or whatever. And it's like, we can always come up with reasons why we're not doing as much as we should. I don't have time to read my Bible, whatever. But here we have a list of people who just got it done, people who just did it anyway. And they were very much greatly rewarded for it. And they were described as people who, were people who were serious, Moses being very meek, Noah and Job being perfect in their generation, David being the man after God's own heart. These are not terms that you get just because of, how you feel about yourself or how you think about yourself. These are terms that you get from based on how you act. And so, friends, it's very important that we as Christians, that, we see ourselves critically and that we look at ourselves honestly. And it's like, am I measuring up? Am I living the Christian life the best way that I can? Am I really doing my part to live for Christ? And, all these, work salvation, work your way to heaven clowns, heretic, false teachers, they'll say that, real saving faith has works, and a real Christian who really believes they're going to have the works, which is absurd and completely not true. However, we should have some works. That is the ideal. That is the way it should be. That's how it's supposed to be. And so we should want to have works. We should want to produce some kind of evidence of the hope that lies within us. And so, it's not necessary for salvation, whether or not you have any works, whether or not you've gotten anybody else saved in the time that you've been saved, has no bearing on your salvation. But we should want to do that because we should be motivated out of gratitude for God doing what he did for us, that we want to go and serve him, like these people did. And people in the Old Testament, they didn't even see, Christ. They were just believing on, what the future held. And the only one in our list who actually, got to see Christ at his physical time was John the Baptist. And so, friend, the people in the Old Testament, they looked forward to the cross, and they had enough faith to believe and live a life that was characterized by faith. And so we should be able to look back to the cross and live a life that's characterized by faith. And, we can always do better on that. And so I hope that you guys took some good tidbits from this and, thought about it, and we'll kind of marinate on this over the weekend and going into the week of thinking about different ways that you could do better in your Christian life, and think about, who you are, not how you see yourself, but how other people see you. Like Jesus, he asked the disciples, who do men say that I am? And, people, they say that, oh, people think that you're like Elijah. They think that you're John the Baptist. They think that you're so-and-so. And it's like, what a compliment for those men who, get compared to Jesus. What a compliment to be Elijah and, have people say that, oh, the way that Jesus acts, you sound like Elijah, or you sound like John the Baptist. And so is the way that we're living our life something that would be characterized as, oh, you act just like, Apostle Paul, or something like that. So that is what I wanted to address tonight. And so I see you guys over here in the comments. I have not really been able to read them because I've been focusing. Jason says, that's the way to be successful, getting the job done regardless of the circumstances. To just be dutiful and like focused. Is that what you're saying? I'm not sure exactly what part you were referring to with that. Catalia says, the blind see, the deaf hear, and the lame walk. If that's not proof that Jesus is who he is. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that, Jason. Thank you very much. Okay, we got Big drop in the registry again. Got some more goodies ordered over the past couple days, so I appreciate that. Yeah, Psalms is definitely one of the best books to read, to just always get something out of it, always glean something from it, full of wisdom on every page. Kitalia, she also says, King David was so special to God because of his deep faith, his poetic worship, and because God chose him to continue the lineage of Jesus Christ. Yes, Jason says, when you said people putting up all sorts of excuses. Oh, yes. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so instead of making excuses, you just make arrangements, okay? You just get it done regardless. And that should be how we characterize the Christian life. And so, of course, before I go, we have another weekly bump date. We're getting to the end of these, folks. We only have a few more weeks left. So we have pretty much at most 5 weeks, but it could be as early as 3 weeks. Or it could be as early as, he could come next week. So, who knows? But we're getting down to the wire of our bump dates. So I hope you guys are enjoying these. But so here is for this week. We are 37 weeks. Yes, so he is officially full term. And so he could really come at any time now. He's being full term. That means that he's fully cooked, and whenever he were to come now, he would be safe and healthy. Now you still don't want to induce, labor, because you want them to come when they're, officially ready. But, if anything were to happen, if I were to fall, if I were to get into an accident and they had to, give me a C-section, then he would be fine and I would be fine. So at the very least, he would really not need to spend any time in the ICU if anything were to happen. And so, yes, that is what we have going on this week, friend. Week 37. Okay. Winding on down. And like I said, I went to the midwife today, and she said that he looks like he's dropped. And so he's getting in position. He's getting locked and loaded, ready for departure. Like this girl in my parenting class I've been going to, she said, getting ready for his eviction notice. Oh, I can't wait. I'm so excited. I'm really excited to see how I handle labor and see how labor is for me. Because I'm really not afraid of it. I really don't think it's going to be like that bad, honestly. I mean, famous last words, I guess. But I think I'm going to be able to handle it very well. I'm very mentally prepared for it. And that's really half the battle, if not like 80%, is mentally preparing yourself for it. And so I'm ready. I'm locked in. I got my breathing methods down. I, know what stretches to do. I know to not tense up. I know to just let it happen and be relaxed and just kind of let it flow. And so I'm ready. So I'm excited for this baby to come at any time. And so one thing that I was doing was that so I was saying how my iron is very low, and my iron's been low for a few weeks now. And it turns out that not only is my kind of like immediate levels of iron low, but my body's like reservoirs, like my stores of iron, that's extremely low as well. And so I've pretty much been anemic my whole life and had no idea. And so this pregnancy has just kind of really brought it to the forefront, because if your blood gets, you're going to lose a certain amount of blood during birth anyway, that's totally natural. But if you lose, the normal, 2 cups, I think she said, and you're already too low, then you could need a blood transfusion. And so that's why it's important that for women who are anemic, that they get their iron under control. And so I'm trying to do that. And so pretty much sticking with, a high, iron rich diet is something I'm going to need to do just for the rest of my life. Just be very mindful of that, moving forward, that apparently what I've been eating is not good enough. And I just need to really be bumping my iron up. So I'm thankful that I cook with cast iron, because that's, who knows how low it would be if I wasn't even cooking with cast iron, because you get, those trace amounts of iron in your food when you cook with it. And so good grief. I mean, I'd have 0 if I wasn't cooking with it. Because I've heard of people getting iron overdose, an abundance of iron in their system from, cooking with cast iron. And so I got to up my red meat. So usually when I go to steakhouses, I'll get a salad because I'm not really into steak. But I gotta get a steak in me. I know it's horrible, it's terrible, but it's for medical reasons. And so I need to have some steak. I had some chicken livers last night. I had a few of those before the show started. I'm gonna try to incorporate that into my diet, because I really don't mind it. It's really not that bad. So I'm gonna try to do that. And just, be on top of my iron, so that, especially as I want to have more kids, that my iron levels starting out are higher, and that I'm just keeping those up, because I'm always saying how tired I am. And it's I sleep, and, I mean, right now I'm not sleeping well. So I'm thinking, oh, it's just because I'm not sleeping well. But, I've been tired, for years. And as I was leaving the office, I was just saying how, we get so accustomed to not feeling good, and we just think that's how we feel. But, we really should be feeling a lot better, men and women. You get some kind of chronic pain, and you just kind of live with it, and you just tough it out. And it's this is a problem. You can fix this if you do X, Y, and Z. And you're like, oh, I was just used to it. I was just living with it. And it's you don't have to do that. And so you shouldn't do that. And so now that I know the problem, I can really work to rectify that. Kat, she says, I carry the baby well. Thank you very much. Jason says, do I have a time set when you will start up your streams again after birth? I don't have a time yet, because that all depends on how the birth goes. So if everything goes as planned, natural, vaginal, just plain healthy birth, then I'll probably only be down for a month. That's what I planned on. I only have a month worth of pre-recorded stuff. So that's what I'm hoping. But if it's a bit more traumatic, like if I have a C-section or something goes awry, then I might need some more downtime. So I'm shooting for about a month. He says just operating on pure will. Yes, just literally, just I'm forcing. I'm just mentally preparing myself. I'm mentally willing it that this is going to be okay. I'm going to be fine. It's not going to hurt as much as people say. And I mean, I've been taking things to make it feel better. I've been drinking my tea. I've been taking this stuff called Gentle Birth. And so I'm bring it on, do your worst. I'm ready. Okay. Kat says, if a transfusion is needed, please make sure that it's not affiliated with the jab. Okay. Yeah, you're right. So that's another reason why I need to get my iron up. So that way I can mitigate my chances of needing a transfusion and getting some very questionable blood. That's what I don't want. Jason says, good to know, because if you would have been able to accomplish what you have without iron, imagine when you load up on it. Yes, yeah, exactly. I was telling you guys that, I've been working with someone, and he's been helping me, work on the channel, and we're trying to, put more videos out and whatnot. And so, I'm doing all this now, just, limping along, barely surviving. And so once I get my iron levels up, I'm gonna be Superwoman, and we're gonna be cranking out videos and content and doing all types of great stuff. And so you guys just wait and see. By this time next year, I'm gonna be a new woman, and the channel will be in the stratosphere. Okay, he clarifies what he was saying. He says, "Don't rush. Safety is most important." But I appreciate that, and I'm glad that what I'm doing is not very labor intensive. I just sit and talk to you guys. But it just takes a lot of mental preparation to prepare the shows and the notes and whatnot. And so there's that. But yes, friends, that is the show for this evening. I appreciate all of you tuning in. I hope that you guys have a really great rest of your evening. Like I said before, you could be somewhere watching a Mike Tyson fight, but yet you're here with me. And so I appreciate that. And so be sure to leave a like on you guys' way out and leave a comment after the stream ends. And if you're not already, subscribe and push the bell to be notified on all the things going on the Mrs. Ginny channel. And that's all right. Hey, the playback is always there for you, so no worries. But yes. Oh, and so my iron is getting better. I think I meant to say that. So saying all that to say my iron is better now, momentarily, but I still need to work on it overall. And so, yes, thank you, friends. And I will talk to you guys again on Wednesday. Bye.